Originally a cheap, plentiful, and man-made substitute for ivory, celluloid, one of the earliest of plastics, made its way into the manufacture of novelties. But it had one serious defect. It could burn.
Welcome to the Kill It With Fire podcast, where each episode, a group of creative practitioners and academics from different disciplines takes a look at cult, neglected or overlooked motion pictures from the last few decades of celluloid, when movies were films.
War made him a soldier. Conscience made him a man. Because only the human spirit can conquer the beast of war. Jason Patric, Stephen Bauer, The Beast. Now on video cassette from RCA Columbia Pictures Home Video.
The cause, freedom, the enemy, the world's deadliest fighting machine. There is no room in a tank for conscience. The film we're talking about today, it's a listener pick, this one, is The Beast, also known as The Beast of War, directed by Kevin Reynolds and based on the play by William Mastrosimone. And this was released in barely released, we should say. We'll come on to that a bit later, I think, in 1988. Shall we have a round of introductions? Adi, would you like to go first?
Yeah, it's fine. My name's Adrian Mills. I am, what am I? I don't know, a lecturer. I teach on the games course, but also have a fervent interest in films, especially from around this period, and like to, I don't know, make games in my spare time, I suppose. There you go. That'll do for me.
Fantastic. Pete, would you like to introduce yourself?
Peter True, also lecturer, writer, and film watcher. That's not a it doesn't really encapsulate the effect that films have on us poor fellows that get hooked into them and whatever. But yeah, I'm a victim of film, I suppose.
A watcher of films. Yeah. I'm Paul Lewis. I am for amongst my other sins, a monstrous raging cinephile. I think that'll do for today. As I'm just dead silence there.
I don't know what to make of that. I don't know.
Absolute silence.
I feel like I need to never bring my child round.
Yeah, I was just thinking if you were in the cinema watching a film and there was a
raging cinephile.
Yeah, would you know?
I think I'd be switching seats.
There is no shame in being a raging cinephile.
Depends how raging you are.
Yeah.
Well, you can't go to the cinema these days anyway, so what the heck?
That's true. You know, on the scale of raging, are you?
I turned that dial up to 11, baby.
Oh my God, you're a full-on frother.
Right,
don't get the script.
Has anybody had any interesting film-related encounters or incidents since the last recording?
We watched Love and Monsters, which was
all right.
Interesting. It's got that Scott Pilgrim versus the World Zombieland vibe to it.
Right. Is that Netflix, isn't it?
Yeah. One of my students commented that she didn't feel that any of the characters were relatable, or you couldn't empathise with any of them. But I really enjoyed it. It was, I think, it was nominated for an Oscar, wasn't it, for its effects?
I think it was. Yeah. The relatability of characters. We might talk about that with The Beast of War, actually. AD, have you had any interesting film-related experiences since our last encounters?
Not really. I've not really watched much. I have to say I've been quite busy with other things just kind of going on. So for comfort viewing, basically, I've just watched all the Marvel films again.
Yeah.
Because they're just there on Disney, and it's like, you know what? I'm just going to sit and watch them all again. Some are better. As we know, some are better than others, and you don't have to think about them, do you?
Yeah.
So sometimes that's good in the situation we are. Oh, I did watch, actually. I just remembered. I watched The Fourth Protocol.
Oh, right.
lovely.
Because we
Michael
covered that on our,
Caine
Michael
I
Caine,
love
Pierce
that.
Brosnan. We covered the game on our other podcast that I'm on.
I
Back to
remember the
Past.
game.
Yeah,
I
so
think-
we covered that, and I thought, you know what, I'll go watch the film, and it was I read the book I think I read the book. It's an interesting film. So,
I think The Fourth Protocol is one of the only films that really has a 90s vibe to it, or late 80s. You know, with the wedge sort of transit and the XR3i, you know, Ford Escort, you know, and the houses that have got that faux Tudor thing, you know. You know, we've got loads of films that have a 60s vibe and all that sort of thing, but that was the only film I saw that had that 80s, 90s sort of.
Yeah, it's 1987 it was made, so I can see why. I mean, it's okay. It has that. It has the thing that stuck with me though. Something after watching it, you know, it's okay. You know, 2 leads are okay. It's just it ends on that stupid freeze frame that films from that period just seem to do a lot of. Yeah. When he picks his kid up and it's all happy. The Cold War's over.
Oh yeah.
I know.
Well, life felt like that back in '87.
Michael Caine fixed it in his big puffer jacket thing.
He did. Yeah, just like Jim.
Pierce Brosnan's the bad guy in that, isn't he?
Yeah. He is. He plays the Russian. Yes.
Yeah.
He plays the Russian who's that's the bomb. I also watched Boss Level. Don't know if you watched that. That was quite good.
I haven't seen that.
It's on Netflix. Mel Gibson, Frank Grillo, Naomi Watts. It's a Groundhog Day type thing. Groundhog Day, you know, source code type thing where Grillo is reliving the same day violently, keeps getting killed in violent ways. Yeah. It's pretty good actually. I really enjoyed it. It's funny. Don't take itself too seriously. You know, Mel Gibson chews the scenery when he's on. It's I would, you know, if you want a good couple of hours, it's all right. I enjoyed that. Thought it was fun.
Cool. Yeah. When you mentioned the Marvel films, it made me think we could do our first ever listener quiz. Put a question out there of what was the first ever Marvel-based movie made for theaters, made for, you know, actual release. Could put that out there, see if we get any answers.
That's an interesting question. Yeah.
It's not what you think.
No, I don't think it is. No, I don't think it is. I remember seeing the was it made for TV Spider-Man movies that they edited into a feature length. I think I saw one of those on the double bill at the cinema with Empire Strikes Back or something when I was quite young.
Yeah, it's not them.
It's not them. No, I know. There's before that. I think I know the one you're thinking of.
Yeah.
I over the Easter break, I managed to finish off my journal article that I've been writing about the depiction of death in Italian exploitation films in the 70s.
Wow.
And that was an interesting topic. I work through.
Wow, yeah.
No wonder you're raging.
Yeah.
Yeah. House with Laughing Windows, Cannibal Holocaust, and Emmanuel in America.
Oh, good Lord.
Crikey. There we go.
There's a triple bill for you.
Yeah. that lifted my spirits. So let's talk about the Beast. Should we talk about first encounters with this, AD? First encounters with the Beast of War.
My first encounters with the Beast of War was last Wednesday.
So you hadn't seen it before at all?
Never heard of it. Was completely unaware of this film. Obviously it's Kevin Reynolds' film, so I think I'm aware of him, but I was completely unaware of this film and looking at its you know, its gross takings and stuff like that, and you know how little is out there about it. It's not surprising really. It's just nothing that's ever come across my radar. So, you know, I sat again. This was like the other one we watched, Flashback.
Yeah.
I just sat down to, you know, I didn't know what this was, and I just sat down to watch it. Knew nothing. I didn't even know what kind of film it was.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, that was my first encounter was, you know, you saying we're doing this film, and I was like, okay. So that's it. Not really to say beyond that, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting one, I think, because it's well thought of. If you look at some of the critical work on it, but it was buried, and that was largely owing to sort of changes in management, I think, at the studio at the time, really. But mate, we'll come on to that a bit later when we talk about the history of the film. Pete, have you seen The Beast before?
No. So yeah, first time yesterday. I do vaguely recall some astute raging cinephile tutor mentioning it in some classes or something. But yeah, that's it.
Because I mean, my first encounters with it, I remember the VHS release. And I think my dad rented it, and this was around the time of there was that sort of period in the late 80s after Platoon where there were sort of quite a few war pictures became popular, and this sort of stood out from the crowd of those, I think, for me. And my dad was a big fan of this, this would first viewing would have been sort of 89 or 90 when the tape first came out for rental in the UK, and he recorded it from the television and would watch it quite regularly. So my sort of experience with The Beast goes back to then. It's had a DVD release. The DVD copy that I've got is the UK DVD release, but it's sort of extras free. There's no contextualization of it, which is strange given the history of its writing and its making, and given the sort of what Reynolds went. This was his second feature film, and given what Reynolds went on to do later with his career, which is to see Hollywood with Waterworld. No, sorry, that was a bad joke. But some of the big pictures that Reynolds made later, it's surprising that this hasn't been revisited. I think for edition, or maybe it isn't given the content in some ways. But it's I don't, as far as I know, it's not got a Blu-ray release or HD home video release of any kind. So, the last release that I'm aware of, at least here, was the DVD that came out in 2003, which is, I think, 2003, which is nearly 20 years ago, isn't it? So, so it's another one of those kind of, a bit like Flashback and Delusion, one of those, the films that we've covered before, a slightly forgotten film. A synopsis. Shall I do the synopsis? I've got quite a lengthy one written down.
Yeah, good.
So the context for this is 1981. It's the second Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and the film opens with an attack on a Pashtun village by 2 Russian tanks. One of the tanks is destroyed by the rebels. The driver of the other tank, who's Konstantin Kovachenko, played by Jason Patrick, intervenes and tries to save the tankers, but isn't able to, and that establishes his sort of selflessness. The tank commander, played by George Zunda, called Daskal, orders a reluctant Kovachenko to crush the eldest son of the Khan of the village beneath the tank, which becomes important a bit later on, as we'll explain. Kovachenko allies himself with Samad, played by Eric Avery, who's from Afghanistan, and became a card-carrying sort of member of the Communist Party after going to university. And Samad is regarded with suspicion because he's of his Pashtun background by Daskal. The other members of the tank crew include the loader Golikov, played by Stephen Baldwin, who quite comically but not comically drinks the tank's brake fluid. And I've never tried that, so I don't know how that works. And Kaminsky, the gunner, played by Don Harvey. And afterwards, after this attack on the village, the tank becomes separated from its column, its radio is destroyed, and the tank crew find themselves lost in a valley. Taj, played by Stephen Bauer, returns to the Pashtun village. He's the son of the Khan. He finds his brother and father killed, and he's named new Khan. He vows revenge, or Badal, against the tank crew and forms an uneasy alliance with his cousin Mustafa, who heads a group of Mujahideen fighters, and they carry an RPG with the intention of destroying the tank. And there's a game of cat and mouse, which takes up much of the film's running time. But eventually Daskal murders Samad and has Kovachenko tied to a huge rock and left for dead, essentially with a grenade beneath his head as a trap for the Mujahideen that are following them. But Kovachenko manages to survive, and he forms a bond with Taj after pleading for Nanawatai, which is sanctuary, from the Mujahideen, and he's learnt about Nanawatai from Samad, from his friendship with Samad. And Kovachenko repairs the damaged RPG for the rebels and the Mujahideen fighters, and vows revenge on Daskal and joins them in hunting down the tank. And I think that covers pretty much. I mean, there's a lot there, but I think there's quite a lot to take in. I think with this film, it's sort of deceptively complex for a Hollywood war movie, I think. Is there anything anybody wanted to add to that synopsis?
No, I think that's pretty. That's pretty. Covers it all, I think.
Thank you. In terms of production and personnel, did anybody sort of pick up anything about the production?
I didn't, I'm afraid. Did you, Pete?
No. I mean, just in discussion there about the director, that it just blows my mind. I didn't realise at the time when I was watching it with the director that he made Fandango.
Yes,
and,
that was his wasn't it? Yeah.
And I won't coming back to it later when we talk about what I took away from the film. That just kind of blows my mind a little bit because I didn't realise it at the time. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a
More
weird
to follow.
Yeah, there's a weird curve, I think, isn't there, with Reynolds' career from Fandango to this, and then on to like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Waterworld, and those pictures. I'm not entirely 100% certain what I've seen of Reynolds' work since Waterworld. Not that I actually quite like Waterworld. I will. I don't think it's as there's 187 I have seen, and I really like 187. Which was written by a teacher, wasn't it, based on his own experiences in an inner city school. Count of Monte Cristo, Tristan and Isolde. I'm not sure if I've seen anything after 187. And I have seen Hatfields and McCoys, the TV series that I don't know if he directed all of that, but certainly was involved in, and that was a pretty good show. But yeah, I mean, Reynolds' work's quite solid, I think it's fair to say. I mean, even the criticised work, Waterworld, like I say, is not as bad as it's made out to be. I know it's claimed for. I think there's a lot worse Hollywood films that have made far more money than Waterworld. So, I just want to sort of talk a bit about the origins of the Beast in Mastrosimone's play. I think I'm pronouncing that. William Mastrosimone. It's based on a play. You wouldn't think it, I don't think, when you watched the film.
No,
I don't think I really I've not dug into the origins in the play until we were researching this. I've seen the film. I watched it 30 years ago approximately, and I've seen it many times since. But I've not really looked at Mastrosimone's play or its background in the play. Mastrosimone is a playwright. He based in New York, I think. He wrote the play Extremities, which was made into a film in 1986 with Farrah Fawcett in the lead role. It's about a woman who turned. Sorry,
Extremities. Yeah, I've heard of that. Yes, that's twigged something in my brain. Sorry, go on. Sorry, no.
I would imagine you've seen it before. I mean, it's about a woman who turns the tables on a would-be rapist, and it's based on a true story. I think it was a story that was recounted to Mastrosimone. And looking at Mastrosimone's work, his work seems to be his research seems to be very thorough for the plays that he's written, and I think The Beast is Nanawatai, sorry, is the title of the play that the Beast is based on. Nanawatai is no exception to that, because Mastrosimone wrote Nanawatai after seeing footage on television of a Soviet tank crew crushing a child. Or so he said. I've read different accounts of this actually, but the major one that I've read from the horse's mouth in interviews with Mastrosimone was that he saw footage on TV of a Soviet tank crushing a child during the Russian invasion of Afghanistan in '79, and he saw an interview with a Mujahideen leader and saw something of what he said he referred to as the George Washington spirit in his comments, this sort of resistance against a greater force, or a larger force, I should say. And he was provoked into action, and Mastrosimone managed to get him smuggled into Afghanistan through Pakistan. because he said, quoting, "I had to witness this fight between a superpower and a 12th century power." And he was smuggled into the country with the assistance of Hekmatyar, who was an Afghan warlord who was being used by the CIA at the time to funnel weapons to the Mujahideen to use in their fight with the Soviet invaders. And while in Afghanistan, Mastrosimone witnessed the aftermath of the Mujahideen's successful attack on a Russian tank column. The tanks were destroyed with explosives, and the Mujahideen took 11 Russian prisoners. And they the story goes that they presented some of these prisoners at least to Mastrosimone to interview, and told him that when the interviews were over, those young men would be killed. And Mastrosimone was sort of distraught at this and quite horrified, and turned away. And as he turned his back, these young sort of tank crew members, who he said were only sort of in the late teens, early 20s, were machine gunned. And he turned around and they were dead. And Mastrosimone was taken by the Mujahideen through the mountains, and to a point where he was exhausted and he couldn't go any further. I mean, this is a film in itself, this story of his research for the play. And his guides left him with a pistol with 2 bullets, I think, intended him to commit suicide. But he was discovered by a boy and taken to a village where he was treated by a doctor, a Pashtun doctor who had actually been educated in England, so he spoke fluent English. And on the return journey through the mountains, the Mujahideen, the contacts that Mastrosimone had made, collected him, and he came back to America. He'd already written a draft of the play before he went, but he redrafted it after, based on his experiences in Afghanistan. And the play was first performed in Los Angeles, and after that first performance, Kevin Reynolds approached Mastrosimone about a film adaptation, and the film began production for Columbia. But during production, or somewhere between production and release, the studio changed ownership, and the new heads of the studio weren't keen on the project and buried it. They only showed it in 2 cinemas in America because they were focusing on. They thought it would steal some of the thunder of Stallone's Rambo 3, which was also set in Afghanistan. I'm sure you remember. They felt that The Beast would steal some of the thunder of that film, and that was their big sort of tentpole picture, if you like. So they buried the release of The Beast and just showed it in 2 cinemas in America. I mean, apparently, according to some of what I've read, the film's got quite a big following in Afghanistan, where it's supposedly screened, on the anniversary of the Soviet withdrawal from the country. I don't know how true that is, but I could sort of believe it in a way. But Mastrosimone adapted his own play into the film script, and I think this is one of those rare feats of a stage adaptation which avoids being in any way stagey. When you watch it, it doesn't feel like I know it's dialogue heavy, and there's sort of limited settings like inside the tank and by the water hole and so on. But I don't think it feels stagey. I don't know if any of you, if either of you have any sort of feelings about that.
If you no, I mean I don't, but I'd wonder. I mean, I do feel I felt it went a bit. I think it was stronger sort of thing when it was in those stagey bits, and I think that it kind of went off in a direction that didn't think it was going to win that in the last third, when it becomes a bit more actiony. And that would be interesting whether that's a diverges from the play, because obviously I can't see him doing that running chase through the canyon.
No.
That would be interesting to see whether that would be how the hell they would do that on a stage. I've no idea. But yeah, I thought it was. But with a lot of these things, like which are clearly based on plays or anything like that, they're always stronger when they're just you can see the play bits coming through.
Exactly.
I sometimes find in these kind of films, and so those dialogue heavy bits, those talky bits, those sort of sequences where it's actors acting against each other sort of thing are always the stronger parts of these films, I feel. But
I suppose that goes back a little bit to talk radio and its origins in the play, with another Baldwin in it as well.
One of many Baldwins.
Yeah, Glengarry Glen Ross. Any films where you can see the play kind of coming through, and those. Obviously it's doing a bit more realism because it's it's in situ, so it's actually in mountains rather than on a stage. But you get the power of the sort of the actor having some lines that were written to be delivered in a play setting, should we say, but on film, and it kind of there's usually a bit more power behind those lines that I always find in these kind of films. You know, I don't know. It's a strange one, but I've no idea how they would do this. It would have to be changed considerably for the play.
Yeah. I mean, I'll fully admit I've not managed to track down a copy of the play because it's out of print, so I've not. Unfortunately, I can't answer those questions. But like you say, the sort of the final third with the chase and the helicopter and so on, you know, it feels very Hollywood, doesn't it? Not. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it feels very sort of like something that action's been put into the film. And it works, I think. I think it works well. I mean, you know, not to criticise it. I think it's worth mentioning. I think what some of what Mastrosimone sort of worked into the play, from what I've read, based on his experiences in Afghanistan, was this notion of the Pashtun Wali, the code of honour of the Pashtun peoples of Afghanistan. And there are 3 tenets there, which Samad explains to Kovachenko in the story. And there's Milmastia, which is hospitality, of course, Badal, which is blood revenge, and Nanawatai, which is sanctuary. And that was the title of the play on which the film's based. And that becomes relevant in the film itself. It's explained, that concept of the Pashtun Wali and those 3 tenets are explained to Kovachenko by Samad. And that even in the grip of Badal, or blood revenge, a quest for Nanawatai must be honoured, and that leads to Kovachenko seeking Nanawatai from Taj and the Mujahideen, of course, later in the film, which is quite surprised that he understands that concept. And there's that dialogue that takes place between Kovachenko and Samad, and Kovachenko asks, "What if I kill your brother and you come for revenge and I ask for Nanawatai?" And Samad says, "Then I would be obliged to feed, clothe and protect you." And Kovachenko says that's incredibly civilized, you know, and that underscores that theme of blood revenge. I think that bubbles under the film, you know, not just in terms of Taj's revenge and Mustafa's attempts for revenge against the tank crew for the harm that's been enacted against the village at the start of the picture, but also if you think about Daskal, the tank commander, George Zun's character, his background in the Second World War as a child, who had earned the nickname Tank Boy because he was lowered onto tanks by his family as a child with explosives, the Nazi tanks, to destroy those. Which leads, I mean, it has that. I haven't seen it for a few years, and it's hard for me to watch that moment at the end where Kovachenko says to Daskal, "Why are we the Nazis this time?" or something along those lines, without thinking of Mitchell and Webb sketch. Are we the bad guys? Yeah. Are we the bad guys? But it was difficult for me to watch it without thinking of that. You know.
Well, is this a good mention? A good time to mention then my shame in watching the film was early on with the attack on the village, when the women come out and throw rocks at the tank. Which references, sorry Pete, it references the David and Goliath story. Keeps cropping up, you know, this idea that you've got this highly civilized military force and against the Mujahideen who are armed with, you know, puny sort of weapons. But the David and Goliath story is kind of referenced explicitly in the dialogue of the film and the play, I assume, too. So when the women come out and throw rocks at the tank, it foreshadows that. Sorry, Pete, you were going to say something. Well, just because it was something that leaped to mind, but with you mentioning the Mitchell and Webb thing, it kind of seems to let me off the hook a little bit in admitting that just made me think of Life of Brian.
Yes, yeah,
same here.
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that.
But I did sort of try to redeem myself with, you know, the observation that, you know, the film, to its credit, you know, makes you sort of leave that behind quite quickly. You know, that you suddenly very quickly realise you forget sort of Life of Brian and all that as it develops. Yeah. You can't deny that it.
Well, the mind works in funny ways, I think, doesn't it? I think when you're a raging, rampant cinephile, Peter, you can't help but make these connections. I've signed you up to my club.
Yeah, I didn't realise.
But this intertextuality. I mean, I don't know. Get on a massive sidebar, but intertextuality can be a deliberate thing on the part of the author, but of course it's also a strategy on the part of the viewers and the readers. In the sense that you can't help but see these connections, even if they're not intentional. And this is kind of like the when you read the IMDb and the movie connections trivia section or whatever it is, and you think, well, I don't think that was necessarily sort of what the author intended. But as somebody who's versed in film history, it's difficult sometimes to see certain iconography or certain themes and not think of the Life of Brian, or not think of Mitchell and Webb, even if it was much later than the Beast. And that's just the way the brain works. It's sort of
it makes me feel better.
Yeah. So
how shallow am I?
No, I mean this was shot in Israel, and Dale Dye was the military advisor on this, and I'm sure we know about Dale Dye. I mean, obviously a Vietnam vet. He's a Marine, wasn't he, in Vietnam? Acted in numerous films and functioned as a military advisor on Platoon, 84 Charlie Mopic. I really like that film. Maybe that's one we should look at in the future. Casualties of War, Born on the 4th of July. You've seen 84 Charlie Mopic?
No.
It's a Vietnam War movie, but you would call it found footage because it's all shot from the point of view of 84 Charlie Mopic is the designation given to the cameraman who's making a documentary or shooting footage of these troops in Vietnam. So it's all presented from his camera's perspective. So it's a found footage movie essentially, but a Vietnam War movie. It's really good. Dye was also military advisor, Born on the 4th of July, Thin Red Line, Saving Private Ryan, Starship Troopers. Just drop that one in there. And the rumour has it that Dye actually negotiated the use of the 2 tanks that he used in the film. There were 2 captured Russian T-55s that had been captured by the Israeli Defence Force in some sort of battles in Egypt, I think. And he negotiated the use of these 2 tanks from Israeli officers over a couple of beers in the bar of the King David Hotel in Tel Aviv. And this is a quote from his production diaries. And he said, Dye went on to say, I hadn't realised until that moment that working as a military advisor on films might employ me as an international arms dealer. That's a fantastic little quote there. But yeah, I mean, the combat feels authentic, I think, in this, doesn't it? It has that sort of that quality of those late 80s, Platoon, Born on the 4th of July, those late 80s pictures that feel sort of, you can see Dye's hand. They don't feel like the Green Berets, do they? Or, earlier Hollywood movies. I think it's worth mentioning the cultural incongruities. I don't think we can sort of ignore what we would call whitewashing these days. This Stephen Bauer playing Taj. I think he's very good in the role, but I don't think one would do that today.
I think it does lead to an interesting thing that the 2 characters are very similar, and that visually rather, and that presents some interesting.
Bauer and Patrick.
Yeah, it presents some interesting sort of ideas in terms of the leader of the rebels, or the more sympathetic guy of the rebels that he bonds with, that gives the rifle at the end. They look they look sort of very similar to each other, especially when he takes his headwear off, doesn't he, to throw at the tank, and all of a sudden it's like you've got 2. That whole sort of thing of once we take the uniforms off and all that sort of thing, aren't we all really the same sort of thing? And maybe that whitewashing aids that idea.
Yeah, you could say, yeah. I mean, certainly, I could see the physical resemblance between Barrow and Patrick. I mean, I would just say sort of thing that it's it's a film shot with actors. For myself, and I think that the fact that there's no, it took because I knew nothing of it. It actually took me a while to realise it was a Russian tank. Because they're all speaking American, and I wasn't sure what this was all about. I didn't know
this is interesting.
I didn't know who we were. It's because there's very little setup in that beginning sequence, and so it took me a while until they sort of started saying names, and I was like, hang on, who are these people? Because they're all speaking American, So well, not speaking American, but they've all got American. There's not even an attempt at a Sean Connery Russian accent. So that, there's nothing in there sort of thing to actually state this is set here or anything. It just some people in a tank, and I thought it was some kind of weird. I wasn't even sure if it was some kind of strange sci-fi film at first. Because the way they turn up in the tanks with the masks on and everything, I wasn't sure what I was watching. That opening sequence gives nothing away, and so in light of that sort of thing, I never took any sort of these are just people playing roles, and so it to me it threw they're not even attempting to show anything realistic of that culture or that language or that place, or to me it was just like, oh, these are just actors playing roles. So I didn't have any real issue with any kind of casting. Jason Patric as some Russian guys, like George Zunza sort of thing. There's no, to me there wasn't even an attempt, and I think by doing it so blatantly, it kind of sidestepped that whole thing for me. That's how I felt. Whether that's an appropriate way to feel, I don't know, but coming at it with no preconception.
No. Well, I think it aims for universality, doesn't it? I think this is the thing that you could say that although the only thing that anchors the setting is that there's that title card at the start, which is a quote from Kipling, isn't it? When you're wounded and left on Afghanistan's plains, and the women come out to cut up your remains, just roll to your rifle and blow out your brains and go to your God like a soldier. But that anchors the setting to some extent, and also anchors the focus on sort of imperialist violence, doesn't it, as well, and sort of imperialism, really. And
it does.
but there's certainly
it does. But you see.
I was going to say that there's a universality to it in that you can look at the film. Obviously, on a superficial level, it's about the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, but it's also about the American experience in Vietnam, isn't it? And it's also about cowboys and Indians, essentially. If you look at the Mujahideen as essentially the structure of it's that of a Western with the cavalry and the Native Americans, the Apaches, chasing them through, the West. The Western plains of America. So there's this universality to it, which I think is reinforced by the language, which is kind of what I was going to. That was the next step I was going to say, was that, of course, one of the other incongruities is all the Russians speak English with no accents, which is exactly what you've just said, AD. But the Afghans speak Pashtun. And some versions of the film, now I don't know how it played in cinemas because I didn't see it in cinemas, but some versions of the film have the Pashtun dialogue subtitled in English, and others don't. And because you when you were watching it, you sent me a message, didn't you, saying should there be subtitles here? And I'm not entirely sure whether the subtitles have been added by home video companies, because I think it plays well without subtitles when you don't know what's being said in the Pashtun
I watched
dialogue.
it without.
I think it plays.
You get the.
It makes sense.
Yeah, you get the feel of the. Yeah, it does. You understand what's going on by the tone, by the body language and everything, and what what you've just seen happen to the village. It's not hard to put together. Okay, and so and then when the guy with the sunglasses comes in, Kantaj, comes in and he's like, oh, we're going to go do this. You can spot the power plays that work here, sort of thing. The innocent people in the village, and the ones probably waging the war out in the mountains and stuff, doing all the insurgent stuff or whatever you want to call it, the resistance, the more overt resistance, should we say? The Mujahideen, so you can see, you can put that together, but because, even if it's not Mujahideen, this is what I'm saying, sort of thing at first, I get there was the thing from Kipling at the start, but you see so many films with title cards that might have some tangential, and that could have just been for me, I just read that as like, is it just a comment on war? I wasn't. It's starting in the desert, so I think, are we in Afghanistan? And I'm not too sure. I don't know. It didn't feel like it, but so I didn't. That quote at the beginning didn't immediately place the film as happening in Afghanistan for myself. I just thought, is that just something they've stuck at the beginning as a this is what happens in a war, and it's by Rudyard Kipling, so it sounds good. I don't know. And that's so.
Exactly.
To me, at first, I wasn't sure what was going on. It did have the feeling, because it was the 80s as well. And this is what I felt, sort of thing, is that, and because of the way they were dressed, the gas mask was, like I said, it felt like some kind of strange, almost early 80s post-apocalyptic sci-fi. There was a sense of that to it to me. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, and I've been watching weird sci-fi films recently. But there was a sense of something other and really strange in that opening sequence, because it was so brutal. It didn't feel human. It didn't feel human. I think that was the thing.
Oh yeah. I mean, let's talk about that opening sequence. I think you're very right in saying that gas mask that Zunza wears as Dascal. For the first 10-15 minutes of the film, it makes him seem very alien, doesn't it, and threatening. And I think that's the point, isn't it? That what we see is a very peaceful. It's beautifully photographed, that sequence. You've got a very peaceful village, the goats in the hills, and it's very quiet. And then all of a sudden, you've got this bombing raid and these two tanks that come in, and this exceptional violence. I mean, it's even for today's cinema, looking at it, is so incredibly violent, because men, women, and children are killed. Flamethrowers are used. People are gunned down. The animals are shot. And then you've got that moment, the climax, is it, where Kovachenko, as the driver of the tank, the other one's been destroyed at this point, who's ordered by Dascal to drive the tank's tracks over Shazaman, who's Taj's brother, and crush him beneath the tank. And I mean, it's such incredible, by that I mean astounding, violence. And at the start of the film, and I think it challenges, because at that point you don't know who. Well, there are no good guys and bad guys, really, are there? But at that point, you don't know who to sympathise with. Well, of course, you clearly sympathise with the people in the village. But amongst the tank crew, who are so the tank crew are the antagonists, quite clearly the antagonists. And then it's only later that they're developed as characters, isn't it, the members of the tank crew? And you realise that Samad and Kovachenko are the sympathetic members of the tank crew. And in the middle, there's Baldwin's character, isn't it? I always get Kaminsky, isn't it? I always get Golikov and Kaminsky mixed up. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the other. Yeah,
Kaminsky drinks the brake fluid.
and Dascal is the antagonist, really. But even he's given a sense of depth, isn't he? With that later in the film, when he explains. His experiences as a child, on the Eastern Front in Stalingrad. Even he's given his moment to sort of explain not rationalise his cruelty, but you start to understand when he explains that in Stalingrad he earned the nickname Tank Boy because he was lowered on. I think he says he was 6 or 7 or 8 years old onto German tanks with explosives aiding in their destruction. There's an irony there of him becoming a tank commander later, of course, and then the reference at the end that. When Kovachenko says, why are we the Nazis now? I think is the line that he says. So there's a lot of irony in that, but yeah, I mean, it's a really impactful sequence, and it establishes that from the get-go that notion of a technologically rich, powerful military force invading a territory that is poorly equipped to sort of repel that force, if you like, and it just becomes a moment of exceptional cruelty, doesn't it?
Going back to AD, sort of, it could almost be a sci-fi thing. The score for me at the very beginning made me. It seemed a bit reminiscent of Blade Runner. The sound. Oh, of it. Yeah.
It's quite ethereal, isn't it? Yeah, mystical. Yeah. By Mark Isham, the score. Just looking at his other credits, actually. He's done loads of stuff, Mark Isham. Blade, did the score for Blade. I'll tell you what he did the score for, and I'm just looking at his credits now, The Hitcher, and that's got a similar sort of ethereal, mystical
yes, that's a good score.
The Hitcher. There's a good score for The Hitcher, yeah, and you can see that in this, I think. I mean, I mentioned westerns earlier, and I said, this essentially this takes the form of a western with the Mujahideen like the Native Americans and the tank crew like the cavalry. But it also reminds me of the Zapata western, which I think I mentioned in a previous recording. These westerns of the 60s where the hero would be educated politically. They would sort of be set against like a Soldier Blues kind of follows that format, where the cavalry officer becomes sympathetic to the Native Americans and realizes that is essentially being sort of brainwashed into treating these other human beings as his enemy, if you like. And here you've got that with Kovachenko, his transition.
Yeah, it goes back to things like is it the Richard Harris one, Man Called Horse?
Man Called Horse, yeah. There were loads of those westerns.
And then,
Man Called Horse, yeah.
Yeah, and then obviously Dances with Wolves would come.
Yeah, well, it's got that.
There
were certain moments that made me think that it was going to develop into a sort of enemy mine sort of thing.
Enemy Mine, another Cold War set story. Well, not so Cold War set, but made during the Cold War. But it's a metaphor for that, isn't it? Enemy Mine. Yeah, it's a good film. There. I mean, at the time, of course, we had quite a few films from America about the Soviets in Afghanistan. We had Red Scorpion with Dolph Lundgren. I don't know if you remember that. We also had Rambo 3.
Rocky 4.
Which was the
Rocky. Why can't we all just get
at the time, in a lot of those films, the Mujahideen were the heroes because they were fighting off the Russian bear, if you like. And there's a reference to that, isn't there, in the dialogue at one point where Samad says that, what's the line? I'm sure I'll put that in my notes. But he says he wants to see his home country move into the 20th century because at the moment they're like a flea on the tail of a bear.
Or the classic bit at the end of Rambo 3, isn't it, where it's dedicated to the brave men and women of the Mujahideen or something.
Exactly, yeah.
I think it's the film at the end. I think this to me, just as a saying sort of thing, But I think Rambo 3 was the closest I could sort of come to. I'm not sure of other films made around this time that we're examining, but I suppose that Dolph Lundgren one. But I'd forgotten all about that, and for good cause.
Yeah, it's not the best. But I mean, at the time, of course, the Russians had installed this communist puppet regime in Kabul, but they were repelled by the guerrilla tactics of the Mujahideen, who were supplied with weapons by the US. And as I say, Mastrosimone was snuck into Afghanistan by one of the tribal leaders that was known for working with the CIA. And the interests of the US were, of course, to prevent the spread of Soviet power and communism at that point. So you had this technologically rich, powerful military force that was eventually forced to withdraw by poorly equipped fighters using guerrilla tactics, and for that reason the Russian incursion into Afghanistan is often compared with the American war in Vietnam, and you can see that in this film. I think the clear parallels, and as you were saying, Adi, the casting and the use of American English for the Russian characters, I think reinforces those parallels with Vietnam. And that opening sequence with the massacre of the village, I think, is quite clearly for me, it seems quite clearly intended to sort of reference My Lai and some of those other atrocities that were committed in Vietnam by American forces. I think that's a reference point for that opening massacre of the village. Not just My Lai, because these things have gone on throughout history, but that being such a hot button topic, I think even in the 80s, I think it's a reference there. But that withdrawal, the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, left that vacuum that enabled the Taliban to seize power. And Kovachenko at the end sort of reflects on that, and there's that final moment of dialogue between him and Daskal where Kovachenko says, "Sorry, sir, not much of a war." No, Stalingrad, of course, referencing Daskal's experiences as a child in the Second World War. How is it that we're the Nazis this time? There's the line. I'm trying to be a good soldier, but you can't be a good soldier in a rotten war, sir. I want you to live to see them, the Mujahideen, win. And I think that's quite a powerful moment there. I think that's quite... the dialogue in this is really well written, I think, but that's Mastrosimone wrote the script based on his own play. And as you said, Adi, Daskal at the start is rendered inhuman by that hideous gas mask, I think, which he loses a bit later. but it's a sort of a symbol of his lack of humanity, I think, as well. I mean, is there anything that you wanted to pick up, Pete, there? About the character Dascal, perhaps, or
well, I think it was interesting with that opening and with the running over of the guy with the tank as well, because it was a very odd sort of. It was a hard thing to consider that, because you've got he destroys the other tank, doesn't he?
Yes, yeah.
With fire. And you hear the crew of that tank, one of them screaming, "I'm on fire," or "I'm burning." So you've got that sense of, well, he deserves to die, or he's the enemy, sort of thing. Directly sort of opposed with the horrific way that they're going to do it,
Yeah, the overkill means that you sort of lose any sense of sympathy, I think, for the need for vengeance. But I mean, the whole film is driven by vengeance, isn't it? Really, it's one act of violence leading to another, which connects back to what Samad explains to Kovachenko about Badal and blood revenge, and its centrality as one of the three tenets of the Pashtun Wali. And because of course Dascal's order to drive the tank over to Kovachenko to crush Shahzaman under the treads of the tank is driven by revenge. So it's an escalation, and then
for me the moment of the tank driving, there was no sense of Hollywood violence or anything there. It was a really uncomfortable. It was how much are they going to show, and it was in no way entertaining. It was like, oh my god, this is horrible.
Really, sorry, Pete.
Yeah, sorry, go on. No.
I was just going to say, you see the after effects, don't you? Later on, you see the corpse when Taj comes back to the village, and it's a really gruesome scene, isn't it? And you think, oh my word.
I was gruesomely looking out for that, but I didn't see it. Do you see the corpse of the man run over by the tank?
Well, it's just a flat pile of meat on the floor.
Just it is. Yeah.
Because I was expecting to see that, and we didn't. I didn't. I missed that.
It's just
it's only in one shot. Yeah, just one shot, innit? It just there in.
Yeah. But it's so incredibly impact. It's not Hollywood. It's not glamorized, sanitized violence. I don't think. And then after the first tank's been destroyed, that one of the characters, I don't know if it's Golikov, but they use the flamethrower, don't they, in one of the buildings and sort of set fire to it, and a woman stumbles out on flames, and I mean it's such incredible upsetting violence, I think. And I think it needs to be, it makes the point that needs to be made, I think. I mean, Dascal, I think, I don't know about yourselves, but I see quite a lot of Captain Ahab in Dascal, from Moby Dick, because he's obsessed with the tank and its security. And when the crew run out of food and water, and there's that great moment when the helicopter lands towards the end of the film, and they're going to fly the guys back, and I'm just looking through my notebook for the line, but I think, is it Kaminsky says, why can't we go back with a helicopter? They have to offer to lift the tank crew to safety, and then call in an airstrike on the tanks. And the commander says, Dascal says, nobody wastes my tank. And Golikovsky, Kaminsky, we're going home, sir. And Dascal says, in a tank. And the other guy says, why can't we go home in a fucking helicopter? And Dascal says, because we're tankers. And it's like, and at that point they realise how much like Ahab he is, because he's got to get that tank back through the valley where they've come, and the tank's leaking fuel. It's quite an incredible. And then they come across the water hole. Sorry,
there's that clear similarity.
Sorry, Pete, what were you going to say? The similarity with
the Quint from Jaws. The shark hunter,
But they come across that on the way back through the valley, and the helicopter's landed, and the crew have been drinking from the water hole, and they've died. And then Mustafa the Mujahideen fighter says, Taj says, we've got to go and it's wounded, it's leaking fuel, so we can follow the tank and destroy it with this RPG-7 that they've been carrying around that Kovachenko's fixed for them. And Mustafa says, he forgets about the Badal because he's got this helicopter. He gets in the helicopter, doesn't he? I've got the helicopter. Let's forget about this revenge that's driven much the
they really look like kids,
yeah.
like with a new toy, don't they? They're well pleased with themselves.
Yeah, I think Samad's quite an interesting character. I don't know if any of you've got any thoughts about Samad. AD, do you have any thoughts about Samad?
I don't know. I thought Samad's character was, I don't want to say plot character, a necessary character to give some exposition, and then, just to sort of, that Zunza is really evil, isn't he? Shot him. He's there to, to give some pertinent plot information and the Nanawatai, whatever the word is, to our hero. And then his job is done, and let's get him out of the way. I didn't get much from him as a character. I thought it was seemed a bit shoehorned into me. I can understand, that I don't know enough about, Russian tank crews in the Afghanistan wars, whether they would have a sort of an Afghani, advisor on board with them at all times to sort of show them around. I don't know these things, so it's probably, but from a story point of view, he felt a bit, I don't know, it just felt a bit to drive that part of and to give our hero when he's, all hopes seem, but he just felt like a plot device to me. I don't know whether that's just me.
Yeah, it just makes some sort of explains some of the cultural context, I think, doesn't it, to Kovachenko? So he's there to deliver that, because Kovachenko asks why Shahzaman was smiling when he was crushed by the tank, and Samad explains that he was happy, and says such men believe that if they die in the holy war, they will go to paradise. And later on, he explains Pashtun Wali and the three tenets of that: Malmastia, Badal, and Nanawatai. I think as well, it could have been easy to portray Samad as a traitor of his own people. He gives his script gives that character a bit of complexity, because he tells Kovachenko of his desire to see Afghanistan enter into the 20th century and sees the Russian invasion as a means of doing it. He's also a member of the Communist Party, which kind of explains his presence on the tank. His loyalty to the cause, the Soviet cause, is never questioned really. Gal's killing of Samad as a sort of card-carrying communist is all the more problematic, which is why Daskal flips his lid when Kovachenko records the event in the logbook. But I mean, there's some good, interesting dialogue between Samad and Kovachenko. I mean, there's that moment where Samad explains that I love Afghanistan, but we're fleeing the tail of the bear. We must join the 20th century. And Kovachenko asks him, so you're a patriot? So was that rebel? He's referring to Shahzaman. He wanted to keep things the way they've always been. I wish I believed in something that much. And Samad says, then why did you crush him? And Kovachenko says, I had no choice, referring to the fact that Daskal ordered him to do so. But Samad reminds him, we always have a choice. So Samad's kind of there as the conscience of the film in many ways. What about Taj and Mustafa? Does anybody have any sort of feelings about those two characters? I think we've talked about the whitewashing and the as we would call it these days, in terms of Stephen Bauer's casting as Taj. But I think that sort of dualistic relationship between Taj and Mustafa is quite interesting. I think we've probably touched on it earlier. Pete, did you have any sort of feelings about that relationship between Taj and Mustafa?
No, well, not sort of beyond what I was saying before about that.
For one, it was personal. And for the other, it was, what could we get from this as a way to strike back at them on a more general sense, and also, like you said, when they get the helicopter, they're just happy. Well, let's forget the revenge. Don't worry about that anymore. We've got a helicopter. But for the other one, it was obviously quite a more personal vendetta and that and sort of thing. So and there's that sequence as well where that one of the Mujahideen is lying there dying and
he's been wounded by that trap that Daskal set with a misfired shell. Yeah,
and then he shoots him in the head, and they come running back because so they come running back, don't they, sort of thing, because they can't believe. To me it seemed like they weren't happy that he just killed him, and he don't care. He just shoots him. He sees him as like, well, that's what needs to be done. It's much more of a, there's there's this the personal. This is hell. God, but I'm doing this because this needs to be done but I don't want to be doing this. It's all about feeling, and it's about revenge and personal. Whereas to the other one, it's more, no, this is just a thing, for the country, for the good of the war, for whatever I'll do, and actually probably quite enjoying it as well by the looks of it. The way he was portrayed seemed to be like he was quite into the conflict. He didn't mind it. So
yeah,
I mean, quite a nice duality there. I thought between those two characters was all right.
Yeah, I think the film's quite clear to sort of establish this ideological difference between the rebels and the Mujahideen, in the sense that the rebels are reacting to the Russian invasion, but the Mujahideen, as Taj sees them, as provoking violence and provoking sort of the kind of violence that we see in the opening sequence by their actions. I mean, and I don't know if this is I think that this is one of the lines that probably isn't subtitled in the unsubtitled version. But when Taj speaks to Mustafa, I think for the first time, I think Mustafa says, "Have faith in Allah and keep a hidden pistol," which kind of explains his ideological sort of point of view, I think, which is quite different to Taj, who's very devoted to the code of Pashtun Wali, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have anything else that you wanted to say? I think I've exhausted my sort of key points in my notes.
on anything in general, or?
Yeah. Anything in general that you wanted to say before we sort of head towards wrapping up?
Well, I mean,
Sorry.
I was just going to sort of. I mean, do we want to sort of say much about? Have we spoken about Reynolds? Do we want to say anything about Kevin Reynolds?
You're more than welcome to. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I was surprised that this was, because when I saw it directed by Kevin Reynolds, this was I was like, what? That Kevin Reynolds, Prince of Thieves Kevin Reynolds, and like I said, especially after that first 20 minutes, I was like, that Kevin Reynolds, and then I went and found, and I was like, good lord, it is Prince of Thieves, Waterworld, Kevin Reynolds, and I was like, wow, this is quite the departure from what he would go on to do with Prince of Thieves, but I don't know, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. It was I thought it was an interesting film, but I just felt I think actually we'll come up to a wrap up sort of thing. We're going to talk about sort of thing, our feelings on the film, or do you want to do that? Or
yeah. I mean, Pete, did you have, before we do that? Do you have anything else that you wanted to?
Well, it was to do with that and the wrap up thing and the Kevin Reynolds thing that I didn't realize. I didn't take note of the director until after I finished it. But there's that sense with the ending that. At first, when I first watched it, there was just this small sense that Kovachenko will, as he's sort of lifted off, by the helicopter, I just got a sense that he's going to go home with a nice souvenir rifle, and he's going to get over it, a bit like a student gap year. He's sort of a few years down the line. He's going to get an office job and a family, and he'll forget about all this time where that time where I went and sort of sympathised with the enemy and found out about human nature and stuff. A sort of like the Big Chill sort of revelation of well, we all grow up, and if people have got a problem with it, then they need a sense of humour sort of thing. But for me, it was that then realizing that he directed Fandango, the same director, that had loads of connotations for me, because as a teenager, I was obsessed with Fandango, and it was what I wanted to do more than anything in my life was drive an old American car around the sort of desert states of America, maybe sort of dig up a bottle of something that we'd buried. But and that freedom and all that sort. But even within Fandango, there's that sense of we need to grow out of this sort of thing and move on. And revisiting the film Fandango now, I still really like it, but there is that sense of watching it from a totally different direction. And there's a cynicism, I think, that's not maybe overtly mentioned in the film, but it's something that really sort of fermented overnight, a bit like Kamansky's brake fluid with his raisins in it or whatever. But since watching it yesterday, and I had this thought of, oh, he's got his nice souvenir rifle. You know, he took the jacket off that he was given and got off and let the helicopter take him away. But it really, really sort of grew overnight as I was thinking about it. There's a cynicism there of a bit like if you learn, you know, at the end of Dances with Wolves, that Kevin Costner just sort of goes back, or you know, Lawrence of Arabia, you know, goes back. You know, they have these life-changing experiences, learning about human nature and culture and stuff like that. But actually, now I'm just going to go home and I'll get over it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, Fandango's a good film, but that's a criminally sort of forgotten one, I think. It's a really good picture, that. AD, do you have any sort of final thoughts about The Beast?
I think that I'm trying to sort of, I don't know whether I enjoyed it or not. I'm trying to sort of put my sort of thoughts into order, and I've been thinking about it for the past week since watching it. It's like a film of, you know, if you looked at a film sort of thing, and you know, your typical hero's journey or your filmic act sort of thing, it really is a film of 3 acts. And it's you've got you've got that the village sequence, you know, to open it up with, which seems like some really brutal, horrible war film sort of thing. And then you've got that middle section which is kind of, you know, the chase and the rationale and the more, the pursuits, we say. And then there's the I don't know, the action sequence at the end sort of thing, because it's like we need some action. You know, we need to be chasing the thing. And I thought that it's almost that third sequence, I think, undermines the first two. It's like there's that bit, and the bit that really did it for me sort of thing was when they're about to get it. They've got in front of it and they've got down into the canyon, and then
Sergeant Kovachenko.
So they're down in the Arroyo sort of thing, and they're in front of it, and there's the pair of them there, and one's got the rocket, and then he just runs off with the rocket. And it becomes, you know, it's like this. It became a bit silly. You know, and then it was like, oh, and then that whole sequence, and then, you know, the women turn up and obviously stone him to death, whatever. I don't know. It felt like a bit all over the place. Like, I don't know, you know, you saying the production of this, whether there was, you know, where the studio went a bit cold on it, whether there was some, you know, the script needed a bit of Ramboing, you know, to sort of bring it more into line with, you know, American view of the Soviet thing at the time sort of thing. And also, you know, we need to make these, you know, the people of the who are being attacked sort of thing, we can't see being seen too clever sort of thing. The hero has to be American, you know, it's still got to be Jason Patrick. He's still be the brains behind the whole thing. And to have I don't know, it just felt a bit strange, and the end sequence just felt a bit convoluted and a bit contrived. And I think it kind of undermined the film for me a little bit. I wasn't on board with that, with the tank chase sequence through the thing. It's like, you know, the convenience of the canyon wall being just high enough that they couldn't get the tank, you know, the tank guns high enough to shoot them, and it all just felt like, oh, that's convenient. That's nice, isn't it? That's good. They can run along beside it, sort of thing, in a thrilling action sequence. And don't get me wrong, sort of thing, Reynolds does good action sequences. If this had been from a different film, probably all right. Do you know what else this film reminded me of? Strangely enough, Best Defense.
Oh yeah.
The Eddie Murphy, Dudley Moore, you know, war film about the dip. I always remember that. It's got to be about the dip. I don't know why I remember that stupid term. Where you know, that's jumping about in time and you know, out in the, I can't remember what war they're in sort of thing. But that, it really reminded me of that for some. Probably because it's an American movie about tanks. You know, there's not, you know, there's the Fury, I suppose, and you know, if we're thinking about war films that are about tanks, there's not that many, I guess.
Well, they were sort of fairly popular back in the sort of thing. There was that Bogart film, Sahara, wasn't it? That's very good. And there's an Ice Cold in Alex. It's not a tank. I know it's a hospital truck, but again, going through the desert in a vehicle, you know. But they're essentially like stagecoach westerns, aren't they? I think tank movies. You know,
yes,
like John Ford stage.
Yeah, exactly, sort of thing. But yeah, it really did remind me of that Best Defense, which again, I'm not sure is a film that they probably wanted to draw allusions with, because Best Defense, you know, I've not gone back to it. I remember quite enjoying it at the time because I was like 15 or 16 when I watched it, and your critical faculties are not all quite there, and you don't, you know, you're only fed what's fed to you. But I've not gone back to it to have a look and see if it still stands up. It probably doesn't. But I don't know. So
but that was shot in Israel as well, wasn't it? Like the Beast of War. Best Defense, apparently, I think.
Well, if you're an American company sort of thing, you might as well, and you need some desert. It's either going to be, wherever they filmed Star Wars. Where did they film Star Wars? But
that I suppose was that Libya?
I thought it was Algeria. Or Tanzania. No, Tanzania. Algeria. I thought it's Northern Africa, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
So you're going to go to that area sort of thing, or if you're going to go to Israel sort of thing, I suppose, if you're, from American company, but I don't want to go down that route. That's that route lies madness. But yeah, I just felt that it just strayed into that kind of action for and I don't think it needed to. I don't know. I can see that it felt like it may have needed longer, not Dances with Wolves longer, but it falls into that, Dances with Wolves, Man Called Horse, those kind of, like you said, are we the bad guys?
Yeah, exactly.
It's in there, and I did quite enjoy it, but I just felt it was just a bit undermined, and I think you're right, Pete, in that him just flying off on the helicopter at the end, which also put me in the mind of Predator.
Oh yes.
Again, these illusions this film I don't think wants to draw. But as you said, your brain works as your brain works. Right. And there's that end shot of Arnie in the thing as he goes off, and he looked way more, for as stupid as Predator is, he looked way more traumatized than Jason Patric did in this. After everything that he went through. I mean, if I ran over someone in a tank, I would be, I'd be a bit broken.
Yeah. It's not something that you'd recover from quite quickly.
No, and I think that shot of him just flying away in the helicopter, and that whole last third, it weakened what this film was maybe about or trying to say. I'm not sure. That was my take on it anyway.
Yeah. It does feel. I mean, I'd love to read the play, and the sort of the action stuff at the end feels very sort of Hollywood bolt on. I think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like you say, AD. I mean, Pete, was that everything that you wanted to say, or did you have sort of any sort of final thoughts?
No, I think that's about it. I mean, I'd looked at some briefly some reviews, and so there was some a really dope movie, and then contrasted with how the fuck does this movie exist?
That's fantastic.
A tale of two reviews.
Yeah. So I think we'll wrap it up there. I think in anticipation of the next instalment, I think I've got something to confess.
Oh, go on.
Yeah.
I love a man in uniform.
Is that the name of the film we're watching, or is that just something you want to get off your chest, Paul?
That's the name of the film.
Oh, is it? Okay.
David Wellington's "I Love a Man in Uniform" from 19.
Another film I know nothing about.
So I think we'll sign off. Say tatty bye. Say tatty bye, kids.
Tatty bye, kids.
The Los Angeles Times calls it a murderously efficient, brutally effective piece of work.
Don't let him kill me.
The most unusual and absorbing war picture since Das Boot. The performances are remarkable, says Jeffrey Lyons of Sneak Previews. No film this side of Platoon has been more bold and unflinching in showing the explosive nightmares of combat. The Christian Science Monitor. The Beast is top-notch, says the Los Angeles Daily News. War made him a soldier. Conscience made him a man. Because only the human spirit can conquer the beast of war. Jason Patric, Stephen Bauer, The Beast. Now on video cassette from RCA Columbia Pictures Home Video.